It was a Friday afternoon, and I was in my last period geometry class with Mrs. Henderson. I just had to get through this one class, and then I'd have a long weekend due to some holiday that upcoming Monday. I remember she had passed out a worksheet for us to do, which was exciting since she never actually checked our work after. My friend Robbie and I would usually goof off in that class anyway, and we'd draw these ridiculous pictures of kids in our grade making fun of them. I know, real mature. I actually think I still have most of those pictures to this day. Anyways, once Mrs. Henderson started going down the rows handing out worksheets, Robbie and I gave each other devilish grins, knowing damn well we weren't doing any actual work. I remember we'd been drawing for like 20 minutes when I heard the principal come over the loudspeaker. "Attention all faculty. Please lock your doors and proceed with all lockdown protocol. This is not a drill." I can vividly remember his voice seemed panic while trying to keep his cool, which was the first sign something bad was actually happening. We've had legit lockdowns before, because there was a period of time that our school and a bunch of others in my area were getting these spam email bomb threats being sent out to schools, and ours never took those lightly. So this time, hearing our principal somewhat distressed was enough to silence the classroom. Mrs. Henderson locked the door and shut the lights off. Her classroom was in the middle of the school, so it had no windows or anything, so it was literally pitch dark in the room. We weren't allowed to use our phones or anything that emitted light, so we just sat in total darkness while whispering to each other, trying to figure out what was happening. And then, all of a sudden, we heard what sounded like a deranged man screaming down the hall. At first, we couldn't make out what he was saying, but then I could hear Robbie's name being screamed. I didn't know exactly what he was yelling, but I for sure heard Robbie's name. The voice kept getting closer. I whispered to Robbie if he thinks he was talking about him, since there are like 10 Robbies in our grade, but he didn't answer me. I said, "Dude, did you hear me?" That was when he snapped and whispered for me to shut the hell up, so I did. We all were silently freaking out until we heard a loud bang on the door. This psychotic guy started screaming once again. He was screaming something about if Robbie kept beating his daughter, he's gonna kill him. It started to make more sense to me now. A week prior to this, Robbie had broken up with his girlfriend because she had all sorts of issues that he didn't want to deal with. From what I knew of her, she was a compulsive liar, and we were all pretty sure she was cheating on him. The guy kept banging and kicking on the old door, and I knew it wouldn't last much longer. Eventually, it burst from the hinges, and the light from the hallway flooded in, revealing this guy in the doorway. At this point, nobody could keep quiet anymore, and a lot of the kids screamed. He didn't seem that tall or physically intimidating by any means, but in this particular situation, he was quite literally the scariest thing I'd ever seen. He once again screamed Robbie's name, and saw him sitting at his desk in the back row. He began to charge at him, but before I even had a chance to react, one of the guys grabbed the man and threw him on the ground. It was this kid who was a state champion in wrestling, which had to have been fate. They wrestled around on the ground for like 30 seconds, but this kid easily got control over him. A few more of the guys helped to hold him down before the police got there. Meanwhile, this guy kept screaming at Robbie that this isn't over and how he's going to kill him. We just yelled taunts at him, being the idiots that we were. Not too much longer, the police showed up and detained and searched the guy. To ours and especially Robbie's horror, they found a box cutter in his back pocket. I don't want to imagine what could have happened if that wrestling kid didn't step in when he did. The guy ended up going to jail for 10 years, which is ridiculous. It should have been more. But it's been 7 years since this happened, and Robbie's moved to the other side of the country for his new job, so I don't think he'll have to worry about that guy finding him. I still talk to him from time to time, and will occasionally bring this up, and now we can laugh about it. I was in third period English when I suddenly had the urge to relieve myself. I was doing this thing where I drink a bottle of water per class, trying to keep up on my hydration. My classroom was in the basement level of the school. I had to walk down this long hallway to get to the bathroom, and there were no rooms or doors on either side until the end. I have no idea what the architects that designed the school were smoking when they made that decision, but it's whatever, I guess. I had just finished up peeing when I heard the principal in the loudspeaker saying, "Dr. Allen has entered the building. I repeat, Dr. Allen has entered the building." For some reason, our administration had thought to use that as a code word to announce that there's a lockdown drill. I muttered, "Ah, shit," and hurried back to my classroom. Sure enough, when I tried to get back in, it was locked. I knocked on the door and asked my teacher to let me back in, but all I heard was silence on the other side. It then dawned on me that our lockdown procedure was to not let anyone, even students that had left the room, back into the class. I just yelled, "I'm going to be in the bathroom at the end of the hall until this is over," through the door, and started walking back down the hall. I was like halfway there when all of a sudden the lights went out. It just went pitch black. There was absolutely no natural light whatsoever, so I flipped on my phone's flashlight, now becoming more curious. I figured this was all just part of the lockdown procedure, and I made it to the bathroom and went back inside. Other than my own breathing, it was completely silent. No sounds of the AC, the pipes, nothing. Because of that, I could clearly hear the footsteps coming down the hall toward where I was. It didn't sound like someone casually walking. It almost seemed like they were jogging. And I may be mistaken, but it also sounded like two sets of footsteps as well. I had the realization that we never got a heads up of a lockdown drill that day either. The teachers never really liked to make it a big deal, but every single time I'd hear at least one kid say something about it. I began to feel extremely uneasy as the footsteps were now right outside the door. I wasn't sure if it had a lock on it, and I shone my light on it, and sure enough it did. I didn't even think. I lunged for the door as quietly as possible and locked it. And not even 5 seconds later, there was these soul-rattling bangs on the door. A man's voice screamed for me to open the door now. I remained silent. I know they knew I was in there, but somehow I felt not making any noise would be best. They banged and kicked on the door, yelling curses and screaming. I knew they wouldn't be able to get in though. It was this big heavy metal door that you need some power tool to be able to bust down. After about a minute or so, they gave up and ran off. I sat in that room for another 2 hours before the lights finally came back on. I still didn't feel safe though, so I stayed inside until the principal came back over the loudspeaker and said the lockdown was over, and to wait for someone to come to each room to dismiss us. A few minutes later, my teacher came and knocked on the door, asking if anyone was inside. I yelled out that I was, and I unlocked it and came out. He started to profusely apologize to me for not being able to let me back in, but I assured him it was okay. I asked what had happened, and he didn't know. We got the rest of the week off because the two men that had come inside were not found, and the police opened a whole investigation and needed the school for it. As it turns out, two guys dressed as custodians came in and claimed to have just been hired, and apparently worked for 2 hours, mopping floors or whatever. At some point, one of the actual custodians started talking to them because he grew suspicious, and eventually reported to the front office that these guys were not custodians. The front office told them that they never hired anybody, and that was when the school locked down. During the lockdown, a lot of the teachers reported that they heard footsteps going only into the bathrooms. By the time the police had arrived at the school, they were gone. Unfortunately, nobody got a good look at either of them, and we don't have security cameras or anything either. So as far as we know, these two freaks are still roaming the street. All in all, it was a pretty crazy experience. I'm so glad I thought to lock that door when I did. I do not want to know what could have happened had I not done that. I'm a female and was a freshman in high school when the biggest thing to happen in my small town in Iowa took place. Before I start the story, I want to preface this by saying there are a lot of details I'll probably miss, as this was an extremely traumatizing event in my life and my brain has blocked out some of the memories. I've been going to therapy a lot, and one of the techniques I was recommended was to write out my experience as some sort of closure, so here goes. I had gone to school like any other day. I remember I was really stressed out because I had a big history exam later that day, and I needed a good grade because I'm just a super high achiever. I had lunch right before that class, and I wanted to get some last-minute studying done beforehand. My school has a small outdoor area for kids to eat when it's nice out, which that day it was. So my plan was to head out and just study while I ate. When lunchtime rolled around, that's just what I did. I was flipping through flashcards when I heard our school's lockdown siren blare. I looked up at the other 4 kids that were also outside, and we all kind of looked around at each other, confused as what to do. I mean, we were outside. It wouldn't make sense to go back inside, right? I started to get nervous since no adults came out to tell us what to do, and one of the older kids said we should go across the football field and wait over there. I didn't know if that was a good idea, and I didn't want to risk getting in trouble, but all the other kids seemed to think it was the best option, so they all followed him, and I seemed to have no other choice. We crossed the football field, and the lockdown siren continued to blare. A few of the kids said they heard a loud pop coming from inside the school, but we had made so much ground between us and the school, it was tough to tell what exactly it was. Then I thought I did hear what they were talking about. As we stood by the bleachers on the far end of the field, I could hear what sounded almost like popcorn being made, or when you clap your hands perfectly and it makes like a loud pop. Then we all heard several consecutive pops, one after the other. One kid said those were definitely gunshots, and as he said this, his voice shook and he went completely white. It was the most helpless feeling. I wanted to go in and stop whatever was happening, but obviously I couldn't. Then, a few minutes after we heard what we presumed to be gunshots, I saw a man exit out one of the back doors and started running towards us. I gasped, and I think I was the only person who seemed to have caught on to this. I pointed him out to the other kids, and one girl shrieked, and our first instinct was to hide. There were these thick bushes that we laid down in and watched as the man started to get closer to where we were. It didn't seem like he was a teacher or anybody that we recognized. Then we began to hear the sounds of police sirens approaching the school, and we saw the man turn to look, and then sprint even faster away from the school, still coming towards us. By now he was maybe 100 feet away, and I could clearly see he was carrying a gun. I had to put my hand over my mouth to keep my breathing quiet as I began hyperventilating. There was a little trail that went through the woods and into a nearby neighborhood that a lot of kids would walk to get to and from school, and it looked like that was where the man was heading. That was until an entire squadron of cars drove onto the field and caught the guy within seconds. They all had guns drawn, ordering him to drop his weapon. He did so immediately with his hands up, and they took him into custody. It was then that we all decided to come out of hiding, and after that I just couldn't keep it in any longer, and I burst out crying and fell to my knees. One of the cops put his arm around me and said that I'm safe now, and I was helped back up. The man they caught was already on the run a few states over. He had robbed a bank and was a well-known fugitive in the police department, apparently. He entered the back door of the school around lunchtime, and it was all witnessed by a janitor who immediately radioed to the front office to tell them to lock the school down. Since half the students were on the opposite end at lunch, there weren't many students in the halls at the time, and they were able to lock down pretty quickly. He ran through the halls screaming and shooting at lockers in the floor. He wasn't able to actually come face to face with another student, thank God. When it's assumed that he ran out of bullets, he made his escape back the way he came, and by now police had already been en route. You already know the rest of what happens, so yeah. I thank whatever higher power out there every day for sparing mine and my classmates that day. A lot of nights I have this recurring nightmare of that guy cornering me and killing me, and sometimes I even wake up screaming. Since then, though, I've gotten a lot better. My friend Darren would always drive me to school our senior year. The deal was I'd buy him coffee or something a few days a week, and that's just how we did things. There was one day that we ended up being like 10 minutes late. The line at Dunkin' Donuts had been overflowing into the street, but Darren insisted we waited to get coffee, and since he was driving, I had no say. Anyways, since we were late, All the good spots were taken, and we had to park super far from the school. I was making fun of Darren, saying how he's a caffeine addict as we were walking in. I remember I saw this kid Charlie walking out the front door with this older guy that was pulling him along rather quickly. Charlie has pretty severe autism, and the way the guy was basically dragging him didn't really seem right. Either way, Darren and I figured that maybe there was a family emergency or something they needed to get to, so we went on with our morning. About halfway through our first period, the alarm for our lockdown drill went off. Our principal, Mr. Landwat, came on the loudspeaker and said for us to shelter in place. It wasn't technically a full-blown lockdown, I guess, but what he said next made my blood turn to ice. He said to shelter in place due to a misplaced student, and I immediately thought about Charlie. I raised my hand and asked the teacher if they knew who was missing, but he said he didn't get any information. I told him I think I might know what happened, and I explained how I saw some guy pretty much dragging Charlie out of the school. Thankfully, he took me seriously and informed the main office, and he told me to go down to talk to them, so I did. When I got down there were 5 police officers in the room. Unfortunately, it was in fact confirmed that Charlie had been the one missing. Apparently the guy I saw just walked into the school, saw Charlie with one of his teachers who happened to be new, and told her that he was his uncle. He insisted that he needed to take him home immediately because of some appointment, and grabbed his arm and just took him. The teacher, for whatever reason, didn't even think to tell anyone or pick up on any sort of red flags at all. I described the man as best as I could to the police, which was all that I could do. They thanked me and sent me back to class. I was texting Darren about the whole thing, and that's when I realized something. I sent him a message saying, "Hey, you have a dash cam in your car, right?" "Yeah, I do. Why?" "Does it record only when you're driving, or all the time?" "Come on, man, you know this. When my car got egged, I started leaving them on in case it happened again." I told them that if his dash cams by some miracle caught Charlie getting kidnapped, we might be able to get the vehicle he was taken in. Once again, I explained all of this to my teacher, and he said for me and Darren to go back down to the office. By then, the police had left, and there was a manhunt going on for Charlie. We told Mr. Landwat that there's a chance Darren's dash cam saw the guy leave. We went out to his car, and he pulled up the video when we got to school. As we watched, I began to lose hope. But after another minute, my heart skipped a beat when we saw the man and Charlie get into this old beater car literally 3 spots away. It was an old black Buick, nothing else really noticeable about it. His camera wasn't good enough to pick up the license plate, but with the make and model of the car, the odds of the cops finding the man were pretty good. We went back inside and carried on with our day. Obviously, I couldn't focus on anything else, but I felt a lot better knowing that we gave the police a decent amount of information. By the end of the day, they found him. The school didn't give us much information other than that, but Darren and I were formally recognized for our contribution. I don't want to make this all about me. I'm just very thankful that Darren decided to wait in that Dunkin' Donuts line because it put us in the right place at the right time. It's been several years since this happened to me. I was in 1st grade, and I remember there were a lot of kids in my class. We would always do these activities where we'd break off into groups of 3 or 4 and go to different parts of the classroom and do puzzles or read or something. The class would get really loud because there were at least 30 kids, all talking and yelling and just being typical 1st graders. Looking back, our teacher definitely didn't have any control over us, which is probably why this story got as far as it did. In my elementary school, all the classrooms were lined with windows, and my 1st grade room faced the woods behind the school. We were broken off into groups doing puzzles per usual, and I was with my friend Eli and I think another kid. It was towards the end of the year, and it was hot out, so we had all the windows open. I was so focused on what I was doing that I barely noticed Eli talking to someone. I looked up, and this man with a scruffy beard had his face up against the window with a big smile on his face. I forget who, but one of us asked if he was Santa Claus, and he said he was. I think he talked to us for a few minutes about what we were doing, if we had been naughty or nice, random crap like that. At one point, he told us he had a few gifts he forgot to give us on Christmas in his quote-unquote sleigh, and for us to come outside to get them. Like I said before, our class was so loud and hectic, our teacher didn't notice a thing until we tried to leave the room. She stopped us from leaving and asked what we were doing. I explained that Santa Claus was at the window, and that he had gifts for us outside. I remember she looked at the window and made a horrified face and rushed to close it. At the time, I didn't understand why she was freaking out, but obviously looking back, I'm fully aware. She screamed something out the window and slammed it shut and had the other students close the rest of the windows and the curtains. Not too long after that, our school went into lockdown. I just remember being disappointed that we weren't able to get our gifts and hoped Santa would still be outside by the time the lockdown ended. I know, I definitely was not the brightest back then, but I think it's safe to say I've smartened up a lot since then. I remember we got to go home early that day, and I'm not sure if that man was ever caught. It's been 15 years since this happened, and there haven't been any incidents like this since, so who knows where that sicko ended up. This story happened to me my freshman year of college. I lived in a big dorm complex with a few of my friends, and every night we were doing some sort of drug. Weed, alcohol, psychedelics, you name it. Our RA was this super chill girl who honestly was more irresponsible than us. On like 5 separate occasions, she'd come smoke a bowl with us and chill for a bit. If it wasn't for her RA position, she'd definitely be hanging out with us on a regular basis. I would never leave our building alone after it got dark, being that I'm a girl. I've heard way too many stories of girls getting scooped up and disappear without a trace to risk that happening. I've unfortunately had a couple of what I think were close calls. One time this van that followed me for like a mile, so I headed towards our campus police station, and once it was clear I was going inside, they sped off. The second time was when I came out to my car after work, and there was a note taped to my door handle. I tried to rip it off, but was having a difficult time, and then immediately realized that was a method some traffickers use to try and get their victims caught off guard. So I said screw the note, jumped in my car, and drove home. When I got home, I was able to open the letter, and sure enough, it was just an empty envelope. So back to the story. It was a Friday around 7 p.m., and the sun had just started to set. A group of my friends planned on going to a frat party later that night, and we planned on getting absolutely destroyed with this bottle of vodka that my friend Trish had. A little about me, I'm a total lightweight. I'm 5 feet, 110 pounds, so it only takes like 3 vodka shots and I'm pretty tipsy. Another reason I don't like going out at night alone. Anyways, we started a pregame around 7, and we had one of our guy friends, Jake, be our designated driver. He was actually in the frat we were going to, so it all worked out for him as well. Around 8:30, Jake texted us telling us he was here. By now, I was pretty drunk and I was feeling good. As we walked out to his car, I noticed his big van parked in the parking lot, and all I remember thinking is, damn, that's some cliche horror shit right there. So we head out to the party, and within 5 seconds, that van had completely left my drunken mind. I go and party my ass off, and a few hours later, Trish and I are barely able to walk. I can only remember bits and pieces, but Jake takes us home, no issues at all. Fast forward to the next day. I woke up to a hangover that could cripple a damn elephant. As I managed to get out of bed, I asked Trish why our dorm window was open. We never had it open this time of year, because my allergies would always get really bad. She swore up and down she hadn't opened it, and obviously I didn't believe her because who else would have done it? We bickered back and forth until I just gave up, annoyed. I went on with my day, going to the gym to do some cardio and get rid of the hangover. When I walked out of the dorm building, I once again noticed that van still parked there. It wasn't a stereotypical white van with no windows. It looked like one of the vans that rappers take when they go on tour. It wasn't a stereotypical white van with no windows. It looked like one of the vans that rappers take when they go on tour. I think they're called Sprinter vans. Either way, it was super out of place being on a college campus. I went to the gym and figured if it was still there in 2 hours when I got back, I'd just let the main desk know. I did a good amount of some intense incline treadmill and headed back home. Thankfully, this time the van was gone. My friends and I hung out the rest of the day, and come nighttime we ended back in my dorm, smoking this time. We were listening to Xavier Wolf, just vibing around, having a good time, and we got a knock at the door. I opened it, and it was our RA. I invited her in for a few minutes, and we were just having a normal conversation with her when she said something about that van. Apparently someone saw the person driving it, and they said it was some old creepy white guy with long hair and a beard. Nobody knew what he was doing there. They just saw him getting back in the van and leaving. She told us just to keep an eye out, and that campus security is aware and to call them if we ever feel unsafe. We thanked her, and she headed back out, and didn't even end up smoking with us. As the night drew on, a lot of our friends headed back to their dorms. Me and Trish just laid in our beds on our phones, still pretty high. I was watching David Dobrik when all of a sudden my phone started vibrating like hell, and I got a notification on my screen as some sort of Amber Alert thing, except saying for my school to lock down. It said there were reports of a suspicious vehicle driving around the dorm building I lived in. My heart sank into my stomach. I got off my bed and went to lock the only window, since we were on the first floor. That was when I noticed the lock looked broken, like it had been smashed. I know for a fact that lock had worked the other day, because I'm a big stickler when it comes to that. Trish said she didn't know what could have happened. But then I had a horrifying thought. What if it was that guy? Trish said she didn't notice any of her stuff missing, and neither did I. But there wasn't really much we could do since we couldn't leave our rooms. We decided to let the main desk know the second the lockdown thing was over. It was maybe 2 a.m. by now, but I didn't feel safe going to sleep with this broken window and this guy out on the loose. Eventually, though, exhaustion overcame my fear and I fell asleep. I must have only slept for like an hour, because something woke me up and my clock said it was 3 a.m. I was trying to figure out what woke me up when I felt the breeze from outside, and I turned over to see our window was completely open. I literally was frozen and could not move as I heard rustling come from our closet. I wanted to scream at Trish to wake up, but I couldn't. Words cannot encapsulate the fear that ran through my body in that moment. I just laid there and watched a massive, dark figure slowly walk across the room, climb back out through the window, and close it behind him. After that, I just jumped out of my bed and ran out of the room shrieking like an idiot. I just screamed for someone to call the police. I made it to the front desk and had them call the police. Through my tears, I choked out the whole story, from when I discovered the broken window to now. They never found the guy after that. The police had a good description of him and his vehicle, so they did a thorough search of the area. I don't know how he could have gotten away since he had such a large vehicle, but either way, as long as I never see him again, I don't care. It just scares me though. He broke into our dorm and didn't steal anything, so obviously he had other intentions, which thankfully I'll never know.